Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and today it is my pleasure to welcome our next guest, Doug Noll. Doug is a lawyer turned peacemaker, and he focuses his time and energy on mediation and de-escalation, specifically with the application of neuroscience and affect labeling. He works with businesses, families, and even in prisons with his Prisons of Peace project. He's going to share many of his ideas and approaches in our conversation today, including why he talks about it being so important that we listen to emotions, not words. He's going to talk through how he differentiates emotional competency from emotional intelligence. He's going to talk through his approach to labeling emotions, why it is so important to avoid I statements, and so much more. He has many ideas to share, and I'm happy to share them all with you today. Thank you so much for being here for another episode. We truly appreciate it. While you're here, we'd be grateful. Take a moment to please like the show, subscribe to the show, share the show. We really appreciate it. Thank you. And of course, take a quick second to check out our sponsors. If you thought about developing the skill necessary to understand what people likely are thinking and feeling by recognizing changes in their facial expressions and emotions, then go to humantel.com. Check out all of their online training, select the one that's best for you, enter the code INQUASIVE25 for 25% off, and get started today. For the professional interviewers that are interested in learning what you can contribute to and learn from the International Association of Interviewers, please go to certifiedinterviewer.com. Get all your questions answered while you're there. And while you're there, learn more about the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation, who qualifies, what it takes to earn the designation, and how you can leverage it in your career. And finally, while you're online, please check out inquasive.com. That's where you can learn more about the programs our clients ask us to customize for their senior leaders, sales teams, HR teams, and beyond to teach them how to uncover hidden value in all of their high-impact conversations. We really appreciate you being here for another week. Thank you so very much. So now, without further ado, I introduce to you, Doug Noll. Hello, Doug. It's great to meet you. How are you today?
I'm really great, Michael. Thanks for having me on your show.
Oh, thanks for being here. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. You had me a lawyer turned peacemaker. I thought that was a very clever phrase and a way to promote yourself. But as people who listen know, I'm constantly fascinated to learn from people who are focused on how to stay calm, how to stay present, how to communicate and connect with others. And between your legal career and your Prison of Peace project and everything that you teach, I feel like there's so much that we can learn and we can share here. And one of the thoughts that I've heard you share previously that I'm really excited to get into today to start the conversation is you talk about the importance of listening to emotions, not words. I would love it if you could start by explaining to us what you mean by that and how people can begin to train themselves to do just that.
Okay, so to answer that question, I need to give you a little bit of history.
Go.
So, as you mentioned, I am a lawyer, still actively licensed in California, but I started my career as a trial lawyer, civil trial lawyer here in Central California. And I did that for 22 years. And then in my late 40s, went back to school because I was dissatisfied with how the legal system was helping people resolve conflict. And I went back to school to earn my master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies. And that academic adventure over 3 years completely changed the way that I looked at conflict. And that's when I decided to leave the practice of law, which I did in 2000, and become a peacemaker and a mediator. One of the great challenges that I was facing in my new work is how to deal with really angry, enraged people, because I was getting called into really high conflict situations, family business conflicts, partnership disputes, congregational disputes, where people were really pissed at each other. And I knew from my studies that unless I could get people calmed down, there was no hope of having them work out their relationship and hopefully find reconciliation. Well, I had been studying neuroscience as part of my master's program. This is long before anybody knew what neuroscience was. And although at that time, neuroscience had not provided the answer, but I had really been deeply enmeshed in what goes on in the human brain and had been studying emotions for years. And finally, in 2005, I was involved in a very, very contentious mediation between a divorced couple. And they had each spent $50,000 in attorney's fees over an $18,000 lawsuit. And the lawsuit was silly to begin with. And the ex-husband was suing the ex-wife. And they were screaming at each other. From the moment they saw each other in the conference room, they were going nuts. And I just sat there and looked at them and said, what the heck am I going to do? And I let them keep yelling and yelling. And finally, the thought came to me out of the blue, listen to the emotions. So I sat them down and I told them to do exactly what you just suggested. I said, I want you to listen to each other's emotions and ignore the words. So I started with the ex-wife and I told her, all I want you to do is listen to what John is feeling and tell us what he's feeling, or tell John what he's feeling. Don't care what he says. Ignore the meaning. And at first she was confused, but then she started to spin it. And I said, no spin, just what is he feeling? And so she started doing it. And like within 5 minutes, everything changed. He began to calm down. And she went from victim and feeling disempowered to be completely empowered and in control. And I just encouraged her and coached her. Never done this before in my life. I was totally flying blind on this, but it was working. So I just kept going with it. And when she finished, we reversed roles. I had John label Susan. And at the end, this took a couple hours to get through all of this because there was a lot to go through. At the end, John went like this and started sobbing. Big, huge, racking sobs. The Kleenex box across the table between him and blows his nose, cleans himself up, and looks across the table and says, that's the first time you've listened to me in 25 years. And they immediately settled the case. This is stupid. What are we doing here? And they thanked me. And they got up, walked out holding hands, and went and had lunch with each other. And my jaw hit the floor. What just happened? Well, I'd known what I did, and I saw the results. So in other mediations following that, where I had intense conflict, I did the same thing. And I would either label the emotions of the upset person, sometimes the upset lawyer, or I would have, if I were in joint session, I would have them label like I did with John and Susan. And I got exactly the same result every single time. Well, I don't know why this was working. I just knew that it worked. And then in 2007, a brain scanning study came out of Matthew Lieberman's lab at UCLA. And he and his team studied the effect of this process called affect labeling. It's emotional validation, but the technical term is affect labeling. And what the brain scanning study showed was that when we tell somebody what they're feeling emotionally, it automatically inhibits the emotional centers of the brain and reactivates the part of the brain called the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. And people calm down in 90 to 120 seconds automatically. They can't help themselves. It's how our brains are hardwired. And so now I had the science to explain why this worked. And so I began to teach it. And then ultimately that led to the Prison of Peace Project in 2010 with my colleague Laurel Coffer. And we began training women serving life and long-term sentences in the largest, most violent women's prison in the world, which at that time was here in Central California. The prison is now a men's prison, not a women's prison. And the very first skill we taught them was how to listen like this. And these women, we ultimately trained about 800 women in that prison, and the whole prison changed. We got a letter from the warden a year and a half later saying, because of Prison of Peace, this prison is very quiet compared to the way it used to be. And there are just some amazing stories. In fact, if people want to, if your listeners are interested, you can Google POP Mediators Speak and go watch the YouTube. It's a 12-minute mini documentary on what happened. And the women you see in that video are the women that we trained starting in 2010. So that's how it started. And now, ultimately, I wrote my fourth book about it, De-escalate, and now I spend my time teaching people these skills. And my promise is that once you master these skills, you will never have a fight or argument again in your life, ever, over anything. And all you have to do is master the skill.
That's a bold promise.
It's a bold promise, backed by science. And I've taught tens of thousands of people how to do this. And it is absolutely life transforming how it works. And which is why I get so excited talking about it and teaching it, because it's so powerful. But the thing is, Michael, is that it's counterintuitive and counternormative. It's counterintuitive because who would ever think that telling somebody what they feel would actually have a calming effect? So that goes against everything we think we know about listening. And it's counternormative because we live in a culture that says that emotions are bad, emotions are evil, emotions make us weak, especially for men. And so it flies in the face of all these cultural rules that we've developed over emotions over thousands of years. So that we have to overcome those hurdles. But once you do it, once you have affect labeled once and seen the result, you will never go back to the old listening because it's so powerful to watch.
I agree. Not that you need me to agree, but I do. And I think it's awesome that not only have you used it in the mediation, but also in business. And of course, having the subset of using it in prison. I think that's an extremely unique environment. So having success in that environment alone really is a testimony in and of itself. And as the conversation goes, I'd certainly like to touch on that a little bit more whenever and however we get there. Sorry for the 30 seconds of silence there. I had to cough and didn't want to cough in everybody's ear. Thank God for the mute button. So when I think about affect labeling, as it's referred to, there's ways that I feel like I've seen it work well and ways that I feel like maybe I've run into a little bit of difficulty with it. And I'd love your input on this, is why I bring it up.
Sure, absolutely. Let's talk about it.
So I feel like there's times where I've said something like, I'd be angry too, or I would be sad as well.
Yes.
And I feel like that has worked for me. I feel like another way that it's worked for me is when someone actually verbalizes their emotion. I'm angry, I'm pissed, I'm frustrated, I'm sad, I'm disappointed, or whatever. Yep. If I say something like, you should be, or good point, or that makes sense, that's a valid perspective. If I say something that validates the emotion they verbalized, I feel like that's generally pretty successful. Another way that I believe I've seen some success is not necessarily saying, Doug, you sound like you're angry. But when I say, Doug, a lot of times when people feel like they've been speaking with somebody who's completely ignored them and they have the results to back it up, it's easy to understand why they would be angry. I feel like I've had some success there as well, where I feel like I've had mixed results, and this is where I would love your feedback, is where I would say something like, wow, Doug, you really sound angry. Because the judgment that comes along with that. So I'm curious as to how have you seen it play out most successful in your practice, in your experience?
The last statement you made, wow, Doug, you sound really angry, is the most powerful way to affect label.
Really?
Yeah. And you never get pushback. If you're getting pushback, something else is going on. There's something else wrong. But the way I teach this is it's a 3-step process. 1, ignore the words. 2, read the emotions, which we can do automatically and accurately. Our brains are hardwired for doing this. It goes back to evolutionary biology. And 3, reflect back the emotional experience of the speaker with a simple use statement. So, for example, I could say something like, Michael, man, you're really pissed off. You're frustrated. You feel completely disrespected. You feel unheard, unsupported, and unappreciated. And you're really worried and concerned. You feel humiliated. And you're really nauseated by what's happened here. You're really sad and miserable and feel like there's just no connection with anybody. And really, you feel completely abandoned and rejected and betrayed. And you feel all alone. And you don't feel loved. You feel unlovable. let that sit and tell me what's going on in your body. Well, how do you feel, even though you're none of those things right now? What's the experience you just had?
Well, I noticed how you immediately transitioned into that mediator slash therapist delivery. So from your tone of voice to your speed of delivery to your eye contact to your facial expressions, all of that delivery was instantly changed for the people who were listening, not watching. I promise you all those things changed. But so in your delivery, there's certainly a calming, connecting effect
Of course.
with the delivery. And I feel like that is likely very powerful.
I will say that if you were really yelling and screaming at me, I would not deliver that way.
Okay.
I match your intensity. That's more advanced. The more important thing is that the words you're speaking and how you're speaking the words. Yes, delivery is important. Everything you talked about is important. When I teach this stuff, that's more advanced. You got to get the basics in first. You got to be able to have the confidence and courage to say, Michael, man, you are really pissed off and you're really frustrated. And that's difficult to say those words because it flies in the face of what we think people want to hear. We feel like it's patronizing or it's rude or I'm talking over. And the truth of the matter is we're listening. And so in learning this skill, we have to have some courage and faith in the beginning and just try it. And so where I have people practice it in really safe environments, like a Starbucks. You go into Starbucks, you're going to order a latte. Look at the barista and say, hey, man, you're really happy today. Perfect stranger. And all you say is something positive, like, you're really happy today. And then watch what happens. You're at this checkout clerk at the supermarket. Wow, you're really excited because you're at the end of your shift. You have no clue, right? But they'll tell you, and watch what happens when you listen to them. Or a server at a restaurant. Wow, you're really excited about working tonight. Doesn't matter whether you're right or wrong. Just the fact that you labeled an emotion changes their whole demeanor. And what I teach people is I want you to watch what happens when you do this in socially safe situations to perfect strangers. And watch the response because the brain is hardwired to respond to this. And the hardest thing that people have is saying you are angry. You are frustrated. It's very hard for many people to get in the beginning until they get it. And once you get it, then it's all you're ever going to do because it's so powerful. Now, here's some things that you don't do. You don't say, I get it. You don't use I statements of any kind. You don't say, what I think you're feeling is anger. That's active listening, passive voice never works. You don't say, wow, I really understand that you're angry and frustrated. You don't say stuff like that. You don't dodge. You go right into the heart of it. You are pissed off. You're pissed off, man. Hey, you're really pissed off. And you can make it as conversational as you need to. Maybe just one label. Man, you're really pissed off. And that's all you need to do. But it works. It works every single time without failure. Now, there are occasions when you will get a little pushback. And that's because you were too aggressive with it. And here's what's going on. So all of us, from the time we're 6 to 8 years old, we all grow up learning that the universe is an emotionally really unsafe place to be in. So we build up walls and barriers to protect ourselves from emotional hurt, especially when we're young, from our parents and siblings and friends. Everybody's mean. Everybody's mean. Very little love, true love. So we protect ourselves. We have to in order to survive. And in some families, building up those walls and getting tough and not letting them see you sweat, not showing any emotion at all, that's considered to be a virtue. It's really not. It's really a form of deep emotional abuse. And there's just a ton of studies on this. So when you affect label somebody like that, you're like a superhero penetrating through their barrier, their wall, and you're getting into them in a very intimate space, and they freak out. So they say, who the heck do you think you are, my psychotherapist? Don't do that to me. All right. So that happens. All right. Back off and come back later with just a one-off. Pisses you off. And just be really conversational about it. And they won't even know what happened. And they'll say, yeah. And you're on your way. It's that simple. But the real trick to this, well, there are a lot of ways to learn this stuff. Part of the reason that it's so hard to affect label in the beginning, if you don't take training, is that emotions, first of all, you have to understand the difference between emotions and where they come from and what they are and what they aren't. And so there's science here you have to understand. But ultimately, you have to understand the emotions are data. It's just like numbers on a spreadsheet. Now imagine that you're at a desk and you have a pile of receipts and contracts and invoices, and you've got accounts payable and accounts receivable, and you've paid money and you've got money, and it's all sitting there and it's completely unorganized. How could you possibly build, for example, a profit loss statement or an income statement or a balance sheet from all this unorganized clutter? You can't. And so what you have to do with all that information is data, and you have to put the data, organize it in a way. In the old days, we used to do it by pen and paper, and then spreadsheets came along. And I remember when the first spreadsheets came out, they were kind of amazing. And now we do it in spreadsheets, or we do it in QuickBooks or some other software program, and we organize the data, we structure it. So now we have all this financial data in a structured format that we can then look at and work with. But if it's not in a structured format, we can't do anything with it. Same thing with emotions. Emotions are no different than data, unstructured data, all those receipts and paperwork on the desk. We have to learn how to structure emotions as structured data that our brains can access. So one of the things that I teach is how do we go about structuring data? And how do we build up an emotional database that we can instantly access so that we're never at a loss for what to say to somebody? So that's part of learning how to do this, and part of the struggle that people have when they're learning affect labeling is that they haven't taken the time to structure emotions into a database that their brains can access quickly and efficiently. So that's part of the process too. But once you learn it, it's really easy. I mean, it takes, most of my students can master this in 8 weeks. It's an hour a week for 8 weeks, and it's like riding a bicycle. It just takes constant practice and stuff. But so these are some of the reasons why we have never heard of affect labeling, and why it's counterintuitive, and why it's not part of our social culture, is because, one, the knowledge is very new. 2007, it's been 14 years, right? 14, 20, yeah, no, yes, 14, 15, 17 years since that study came out. And, it's just not, it hasn't been broadly disseminated yet. That's what my job is. And then second, it requires a set of skills that you need to master in order to engage in the practice effectively. Otherwise, we go back to our reactive stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Well, many good points in there. Reps matter. So the more you practice, the more you rep. And making the right reps, of course, are important, but repetitions certainly matter. Practice certainly matters. Having the courage to get started, like you said, certainly matters. I love how you talked about avoiding I statements, particularly I understand. One of the things that I've seen is somebody might try to defuse a situation by saying I understand, but really what they did was they poured fuel on an open flame, and then they wonder why it blew up in their face. So another great point there. Certainly love the emotions are data points. Love that. In a minute, I would love to talk about how you teach people to structure emotions into that database that they can use. And I really appreciate you walking through the exception, I think, as you phrased it, for if you do get a little bit of pushback. As I'm going to be honest, I like how you said, if you get pushback to this, there likely is something else going on. I certainly appreciate that. Anytime I hear statements like works every time, never an issue, that always kind of sets off red flags, because there are always I'm using always. There are typically exceptions that prove every rule, right? And I think there was a very important tweak in what you made too, where the illustration was you look pissed off. Well, if you just penetrated their walls that they were taught as they were kids, come back a little later and more conversationally, it's that pisses you off.
Right.
So now that the focus is on the action that pissed you off, as opposed to you being pissed off, and that judgment is no longer conveyed in the statement, which is likely why it works a little bit better. So I certainly appreciate that clarification as you went through.
Let me talk a little bit more about I statements and also something else you said that I want to kind of elaborate on. Why don't we use I statements? If I said something like, what I think you're feeling is X, what am I really doing? I'm making the statement about me. And why am I doing that? Because unconsciously, I'm trying to soothe my own anxiety around your emotions. When you're emotional and I don't know how to respond to it, I'm going to feel anxious. The one thing the brain can't handle is anxiety, and it will do everything it can to get rid of anxiety. So, for example, you might say something like, stop being a drama queen, or come on, pull up your pants, rub dirt in it. It doesn't hurt. That's not a big deal, but I do listen to you. Those are invalidating statements, and we say those invalidating statements to soothe our own anxiety. Or here's another example. How many times have you been in a situation where somebody's been upset and you immediately give them advice or try to solve the problem for them? Doesn't work. Why? Because it's invalidating. You're trying to soothe your own anxiety around their emotions. It's all about you. And the listener and the speaker knows that. They know it intuitively that you don't care about them. All you care about is calming yourself down. Or a third situation. How about when somebody's really angry and upset and you say, hey, you justify, rationalize, explain, and you try to be rational with somebody who's really angry. It never works.
No.
Why? Because what you're trying to do is soothe your own anxiety around their anger, because their anger is provoking you to be frightened and scared and upset. And so you're trying to soothe yourself. And by trying to soothe yourself, you just inflame, as you said, pour gas on, which is exactly right. You pour gas on the situation. None of that works. And it never has worked.
Yeah, and I think too, some of us, either by operational condition or maybe personal preference, like to be the problem solvers. And
we do, yes, we do, because we feel like we're in control. So again, it reduces our anxiety.
So often, what do they say? The road to hell is paved with great intentions.
That's right.
So I feel like I'm intending to try to help you, but I'm actually making the situation worse along the way.
And we don't know that because we're culturally conditioned to do all this stuff, because we've never been trained or aware of there's a much better way to deal with emotions than all this old stuff that we've learned in the past from our upbringing, and just because that's the way just people are. And the more I study this and the more I practice it, the more powerful I see it, because once we start validating emotions and telling people how they're feeling, the closer our connections are, the more intimacy we build in our personal relationships, the more trust and loyalty we build in our business and professional relationships. And I'm writing my 5th book right now on leadership empathy. And I'm basically taking these ideas and showing with just a very slight tweak of how you, as a leader, talk to people, you completely change the dynamic of the conversation. And instead of people being resistant and pissed off, they become happy and loyal, and they want to work with you. They want to collaborate. They want to cooperate. It's just how you phrase things. And where people get it off is because they don't know this stuff. It's all becomes me focused. And the other person, the speaker, feels that and gets disengaged. And now you've got conflict.
Yeah, and under stress, we typically go to what we know, which is us, right? What we feel, what we know, what we've experienced.
Exactly.
So I've got to ask, you said there's one little tweak for leaders. What's the tweak that the leaders need to make in order to maximize their communication?
Get rid of I statements. Eliminate I statements. So you never want to walk into a meeting and say, I understand that you're already pissed off. Worst thing you can say. If you're going to say anything like that, you say, you guys are really pissed. Get rid of I statements. The moment you use an I statement, it's all about you and nothing about the other person. And that's the biggest thing I can say is just don't use I statements.
And to break that rule, I completely concur. So I want to get back to looking at emotions like data points. And I might not be paraphrasing a little bit.
No. It's just emotional data, right?
Yeah. So I don't know if this ties into your point about emotional competency versus emotional intelligence.
Right, it does.
Perfect. So if you could walk us through that difference,
all right,
and then how we can learn to collect these data points.
Okay, so let's start with the bigger picture: emotional intelligence versus emotional competency. Everybody gets this wrong. And when I say everybody, I mean, I should say most people or many people, I don't know. But I many years ago, I went out on Google and I want, first of all, how many online companies are promising to teach emotional intelligence? And I stopped counting at about 250. A lot. And then I started just randomly looking at their offerings. And I saw that no. And I got curious. Why aren't they teaching emotional intelligence? Why they claim to, though there's a lot going on. And then I finally figured it out. Emotional intelligence is a term that was coined in the late 80s, early 90s by Salovey and Meyer, who were two psychologists, one at the University of New Hampshire, one at Yale. Yale guy, Salovey, is now the president of Yale. I think he's still the president of Yale. And they coined the term emotional intelligence to describe a social intelligence that is not measured by the typical cognitive tests that form other kinds of intelligence, such as IQ, which tests algorithmic intelligence, and the Watson-Glaser critical thinking test, which teaches fluid intelligence. And Daniel Goleman, who was at that time a New York Times science writer, PhD in psychology, found the study and that he wrote a book about it. And in 1995 came up with this book about emotional intelligence, which became an international worldwide bestseller. And he ended up making buckets of money on this. And if you look at the literature today, the commercial emotional intelligence is divergent from the academic stuff about emotional intelligence. Here's the thing. You can't learn intelligence. You can't learn emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence measures emotional competency. Now, you can learn emotional competency. And the more emotionally competent you become, the higher you're going to score on an emotional intelligence assessment, like the Myers-Salovey-Caruso emotional intelligence test. That's sort of the gold standard as the assessment. So what are the emotional competencies? I boil it down to 3. Some people will have 5, but the 3 emotional competencies are emotional self-awareness. What am I feeling? What are you feeling? I'm aware of the emotions. Number 2, emotional self-regulation. I'm really angry. How do I choose to react to that anger? What behaviors I'm going to choose to that? If I'm reactive, I'll punch you out. If I'm emotionally intelligent, if I have emotional competence, I will be able to make other choices around dealing with my anger. And the third is the development of empathy, or what I call cognitive empathy. And here's the beauty, Michael. Affect labeling is cognitive empathy. When you learn how to and start practicing affect labeling, you automatically increase your emotional self-awareness and your emotional self-regulation. It happens automatically. You don't have to do anything. So just the practice of affect labeling by itself raises your emotional intelligence exponentially. So that's the concept. Now, when we get to thinking about emotions as data, what we have to do is organize emotions in a way that is accessible. And so the way I teach that is emotions come in layers. You never have one emotion all by itself. You have multiple emotions. And I don't want to get too deep into this. I basically created 7 layers. You have fear emotions. Now, let's start at the top. You've got anger emotions, fear emotions. You have disgust emotions. You have shame emotions. You have sadness emotions. And you have abandonment emotions. And each of those 7 layers have variations or different levels of granularity or different gradations of anger. So if we just take anger, for example, what are the anger emotions? Well, you've got anger, annoyance, irritation, frustration, rage, jealousy, hatred. They're all anger, but they're different kind. They have different flavors. Imagine an artist's palette, and you got 3 primary colors in black and white. An artist can make millions of different colors with that palette. It's the same thing with our brain. We make emotions out of something called affect. We are born with 9 basic affect. We're not born with emotions. We have to create emotions. So we're born with affect, and we learn how to create emotions as children, very young, 18 months. And that's if all goes well. But the problem is that most of us never learn how to do that because we live in emotionally dysfunctional families. There was a family therapist, very famous. Her name was Virginia Satir in the 70s and 80s. And she said 98% of all families are dysfunctional, and 2% that say they're not are lying. And we are emotionally dysfunctional because nobody knows how to work with emotions. So families have all kinds of different ways of managing emotions within the family structure. Very few of them are healthy. And so as a result, children do not learn how to structure emotions. They don't learn about, like, there are 8 or 9 different kinds of anger and fear, or let's take disrespect. And so you got disrespect, and there are other gradations of that, such as not feeling heard, being ignored, feeling invisible, not being appreciated, not being supported, being treated unfairly. All those feelings are forms of disrespect. So what we learn to do, and what I teach people how to do, is to build a matrix. So on the left column, you put down these 7 emotions: anger, fear, make sure I get it right, anger, fear, disgust, shame, sadness,
and abandonment.
Yeah. So you got, and then that's on the left side in the column, and then on the right side, what are all the different kinds of emotions that fit within that category? And so when they're done filling, I actually run people through an exercise to do this. When they're done, they have a list of somewhere between 30 and 50 words in these 7 layers. And now all of a sudden we've got structured data. Wait a minute. Okay, I got that. And so now how do you use it? You say, well, what presents first? Somebody's pissed off. Fine. You start with the anger layer. Okay, I can immediately access anger. Now, what kind of anger does this person have? And your brain knows, and it just starts to process. Oh, it's not intense anger, just frustration and pissed off. So you say, oh, you're really angry and pissed off. And you say, well, okay, what else is there? Well, typically, what causes anger? It can be caused by any of the other emotions, but you can say, oh, you feel really disrespected. You've just been treated like you're invisible, and you feel unappreciated and unsupported. How easy is that? And now we always know that fear is involved with these negative emotions, but it's not fear in the sense of terror or being scared. It's usually anxiety. You're really anxious. Maybe that's too strong a word. You're really worried and concerned. So now I'm 3 layers down. I'm almost halfway there. Then we say, okay, I wonder if there's any disgust here. And you sort of listen and, you're really offended. That's a disgust emotion. And then from there, it's shame and humiliation. You're really embarrassed. This is all happening to you. And then you go to the next layer, which is sadness. We got a whole bunch of sadness emotions. You feel sad. You're depressed. You're miserable. You don't feel like there's any connection with anybody. And you just feel really lost and out of control. And then we go to the last layer, which is the deepest. You feel completely abandoned. You'd be amazed at how often people feel abandoned. People feel this all the time. You feel abandoned, rejected, betrayed, unloved, and unlovable. And that's how you structure the data. You just learn that database, and then you just work through the database. And that's how you're able to affect label fluidly. And it takes a little practice, like I said. But once you get it, it's easy. It's automatic. You don't even think about it.
I appreciate you walking us through that. And some of the other examples you've given us previously, you've referenced the science behind it. I'm curious the science that you found behind the 7 different layers of emotions and the 9 different emotions.
Affect. Yeah.
Okay.
So all mammals, actually, some people are now saying all living creatures have a thing called affect. AFFECT. Some people are saying even plants have affect. I haven't done the research. I can't speak to that. But I do know that all mammals have affect, including humans. And affect is something we're born with. And it's our basic feeling of pleasantness and unpleasantness that we experience throughout the day. And affect has 2 components to it. Valence, which means that it's either positive affect, it's neutral, or it's negative. And arousal. Very low arousal, moderate arousal, high arousal. So, and we're born with affect, and there are 9 of them. Well, I use the Sylvan-Tompkins model. There are other people, Paul Ekman might say there are only 2 affect. I disagree with that. I think Sylvan-Tompkins has a much better model than what a lot of people talk about. 9 affect, there's a lot we can work with. And it turns out that of these 9 affect that we're born with, neuroscientists are now showing, okay, for example, disgust. Well, we know that disgust originates in the insular cortex. We know that happiness, pleasure, happiness and joy, dopamine in the striatum. We know that anger, rage, amygdala, and other limbic systems. So we can associate brain circuitry systems and neurotransmitters and hormones with all of these 9 different affect. So these are things that every baby is born with. But what we're not born with is emotion. And emotions are biological. I've got my definition right here, so I don't forget it. Biologically based patterns of perception, experience, physiology, action, and communication that are culturally created in our brain. So our cultures tell us what emotions to create, because we could have an infinite number of emotions out of these 9 basic affect. So what cultures are we in? So for example, Finland. The Finnish people have emotions in their language that do not exist in English. And we have emotions here in North America that do not exist in Finland. Why? Because they have a very different culture than we do. And so that culture creates experiences that are affective, and they have to describe what that affective experience is, and that's what we call an emotion. And it turns out that emotions are created and stored in a database, metaphorically speaking, in a part of the brain called the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. And what did Lieberman's study show? He showed in 2007, he showed that when we affect label, the emotional centers of the brain are inhibited, and at the same time, the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex is activated. So we can access our database again. So when we're affect labeling, I am literally lending you my prefrontal cortex for the 90 seconds it takes to reboot your prefrontal cortex to come back online and be able to process your emotions. And that's what's going on. Fascinating, huh?
And 90 seconds is about that time that it takes?
90, typically it's 90 seconds. It could be longer. It could go on for a couple of minutes. But usually if you're affect labeling somebody and you're doing a good job and they're still upset after a minute or 2 minutes, there's something clinically wrong. And they probably suffering from trauma and need to get some help on that.
Would it be that something's clinically wrong, or the emotion has been ongoing long enough, the situation has been protracted long enough that I'm going to say this probably in a terrible way, but the wires have been so crossed for so long, it just takes that much longer to untangle them. It doesn't necessarily mean there's anything clinically wrong.
Right. I would say that if you describe a clinical situation, okay, trauma, for example, there's nothing wrong with something being clinically wrong. It just means you need a deeper level of intervention to help sort it all out. And my job is not as a peacemaker. I'm not a therapist. My job is to help people find peace and to resolve conflict, or to prevent conflict from occurring in the first place. If you've got a clinical problem because you, for example, are a trauma survivor, that's not something I can help you with. You need to go get clinical help. And there are all kinds of really amazing interventions that are useful these days for dealing, for example, with trauma or PTSD. And that's beyond the scope of the work that I do. However, I've been in plenty of situations as a mediator where I've seen that, potentially clinical problems. And part of my intervention is to say, this is what I'm seeing. And one of the things you might think about is getting some help on this. And here are a couple of places to go that might be able to help you resolve that. For the normal person, the person who's not clinical or doesn't have trauma or that sort of problem, 90 seconds, 120 seconds almost always works. You can take a 2-year-old screaming meltdown tantrum, and that child will be calm and laughing in 90 to 100 seconds.
Well, for all the parents of toddlers, they've got to get their stopwatch out and put it to the test.
I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten from parents over the years that have said that we started affect labeling our 2, 3-year-old toddler, and within 4 to 5 months, all the tantrums went away. Pretty amazing.
It sounds like it. Before I forget, you mentioned that there's emotions that exist in Finnish language and the English language and vice versa that don't cross over because of our culture.
Right.
You've piqued my curiosity.
What's the emotion?
Yeah.
Hard to tell you to ask that. All right. I don't know what the word is in the Finnish language.
Yeah, I don't expect you to speak Finnish. I wouldn't put you there.
But one of the things they have, because it's a cold climate, right? And they spend a lot of time together they have words that describe what it's like to be in a warm, safe room with people that you're close to. It's a connection emotion. And we don't have anything like that. We don't have any words to describe that. And they have an emotion that they all experience when they're all together on a cold winter night in a room together, socializing. That there's just nothing that even comes close to translating it in English. And I'd have to go find it again. I used to know the word, but I don't anymore. But that's just a great example of how we create emotions, and we're not born with emotions. And, this was a huge shock for me. I mean, think about everything that I'm talking about with you, Michael, and think about my background. I'm an Ivy League graduate, graduated in Dartmouth, honors law student, graduated in law school, practiced law for 22 years. And here I'm talking about all this stuff that is just flies in the face of a lot of my professional training.
Well, and I can't speak to your professional training because although I'm from New Hampshire, Dartmouth wouldn't necessarily open its doors to me when I was of college attending age. But you touched on something earlier that I think ties into what you just said, that oftentimes very smart people find themselves struggling to understand why rational solutions don't solve emotional problems. And that's something that you touched on earlier in the conversation. So branching out, I'm assuming that your education and your career taught you the rational side quite well, but then branching out to learn the emotional side to supplement or even replace when necessary has created the successful opportunities for you.
Here's what I've learned. It was a huge eye-opener. There is no such thing as rationality. Rationality is a myth. And if you can use ChatGPT or Gemini or Google, go wherever you want, Wikipedia, look for a definition of rationality, and you will not find a definition that makes sense. It's all circular. And neuroscience have known since the 90s that all decision-making is emotional. If we don't have emotions, we can't make decisions. And so what I teach is abandon reasoning in relationship and forget about rationality. Every single thing we do as human beings in terms of behavior and decision-making is emotionally based. Fundamentally, we're making a decision. Will this bring me pleasure or can I avoid pain? Down at the neuronal level, that's the equation that's going on, and everything's weighted. And so we stack all our decisions in trying to avoid pain, and we're attracted to pleasure. That's totally emotional. Affective, technically it's affective. And then we convert affect into emotion. So the mistake that we make is that we think that the Platonic ideal of being able to control emotions and be rational will lead to a better life. It won't, because rationality doesn't exist. So what we have to learn is that we are emotional beings. And you can't solve emotional problems with logic or reasoning. You can only solve emotional problems with emotional tools. And yet we persist in thinking, if you just be rational about this, we could solve this problem. Or stop being so emotional. Or in business, if people are told, check your emotions at the door, don't bring your emotions to work. Well, basically you're saying, leave all your judgment and decision-making outside. Because emotions are critical to judgments and decision-making. You leave your emotions outside, you can't do anything. You're asking me not to function. But it's because the human experience with unregulated negative emotion has been so bad over so many thousands of years that we are averse. We have become averse to learning how to recognize emotion and learning the tools that teach us how not to have those bad outcomes. And the hope and the joy of affect labeling is finally we have a tool that works and that we can now work with emotions. And I can deal with your anger and your upset from a place of compassion and confidence and composure and not get triggered myself and calm you down in a very, very short period of time. We've never had that skill before. This is new in human history. And it's powerful.
When you talk about the composure to respond, there's a couple of questions that I like to circle back to, things you've talked about before, about how you teach it or how you teach people to recognize it. But composure is one that I'm constantly fascinated by.
Right.
As part of this, how do you teach people to maintain their composure?
Well, I'll approach it at a couple of different levels. One way I describe it is to think about being in a Buddha bubble. Imagine an energy bubble of Buddha around you, right? And so if you're in the Buddha bubble, you immediately you tell yourself, I'm going to be non-critical, non-judgmental, and non-reactive. So if you're going into a difficult conversation, for example, the first thing I do is I put myself in the Buddha bubble. I don't care what they say. I'm not going to react. I'm not going to be critical. I'm not going to be judgmental. All I'm going to do is listen and affect label. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it, another way to develop it is to start affect labeling in really safe situations and slowly build up your muscle over a period of time, couple months. And then what will happen is when you are confronted with somebody who's angry or upset, you will automatically not become judgmental or critical or reactive. You'll just simply say, hey, man, you're really upset. And then if it's really tough, and this is what I learned in the prisons over 10 years, is I would teach my incarcerated students how to recognize and reprogram their own triggers. And this became important in prison because obviously people are there for a reason, and anger and violence are the only way, that's the only medium of exchange for conflict. So what gets you triggered? And so I developed trigger worksheets, and I take my students through these trigger worksheets and say, okay, so where did this trigger, ultimately, what are the triggers? What are the environmental cues that are going to cause you to get triggered? When you do the trigger, what happens? What other choices do you have to make in the moment? List the 10 most important triggers you've got, and then where do they all come from? And that has a really profound effect. When people start working on those worksheets and they start examining, this is self-awareness, right? So you start examining where the triggers come from and what they are, and then you start programming yourself. All right, when I'm in this situation, I am likely to be triggered, and here's how I choose to behave. When I'm going to be in affect labeling mode, Buddha bubble. 2, if I feel triggered myself, I'm going to affect label myself. This is where I statements are useful. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I'm pissed off. I feel disrespected. I'm not saying you, Michael, are disrespecting me. I'm saying just as how I feel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that affect labeling on yourself has the same effect as if somebody were affect labeling you. And with practice, I was going to say with practice, not a lot of practice. And we're not talking years. You don't have to crawl up a mountain and live 40 years in a cave or get a guru or a therapist to do this stuff. This happens fast. You can learn this stuff, like I said, in literally months. You are now get to a point where if you get upset with me, I immediately go to that compassion reaction with confidence. I know exactly what's going to happen. Every human brain is hardwired the same way. I know that if I do this, you're going to calm down. I know it because it happens every single time. And if I get pushed back, okay, that's bad on me. I was too aggressive, so I back off. But your brain will still respond to affect labeling, even though you pushed me a little bit because maybe I was a little too aggressive affect labeling you.
Yeah, this to circle halfway back and then come forward again. When you talk about the I statements on ourselves, understanding our own triggers and identifying how we feel, for me, and I feel like that ties back into the emotional awareness and regulation that you talked about earlier, which are the emotional competencies that you talked about
Yes,
earlier.
exactly correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
that to me, that would be high level for the people that have been able to do that. It's not you made me angry, it's I'm angry. So my interpretation of what you're doing right now, in comparison likely to my expectation and the distance between the two, is what's making me angry. So that trend, the ability to recognize that, I can see being extremely helpful. And for you to make that type of headway in a prison environment is very complimentary. So taking people through the trigger checklist, I see how we can get there. How do you teach people to recognize emotions in others?
Oh, that's a great question. That's the second step, right? Read the emotions. So we have the innate ability, we human beings, our brains have the innate ability to read other people's emotions quickly, efficiently, effortlessly, and accurately without error. We have this ability. Why don't we use it? Because our culture tells us emotions are bad, and we never take the time to develop that innate ability into the skill that we can use. And why is it that we have this skill? I got really interested in this. So I went back, like, I'm a scholar, and started doing the research. Language evolved in Homo sapiens about 230,000 years ago. And a couple of things happened. One, two genes mutated, which allowed for a complete change on our brain structure. And two, our diets shifted with the mastery of fire, because now we were able to render animal fat and render grains, insoluble grains, into soluble fiber that we could eat and get calories out of. So our caloric food intake grew dramatically at the same time these two brain mutations occurred. That allowed for a massive increase in the pharyngeal muscles and the pharyngeal nerves that control the larynx, the mouth, and the tongue, which is how we create. And at the same time, two areas in our brain started evolving that didn't exist before: Wernicke's area and Broca's area, which are the two, one is listening and one is speaking. We didn't have vocabulary before 230,000 years ago. And from the beginnings in 230,000 years ago, it probably took another 50, 60, 70,000, maybe 80,000 years before we had formal language. And with formal language came symbolic thinking, because that's what language is. It's a symbolic representation of our external environment. And that allowed for the development of culture and civilization starting about 12,000 years ago. How did hominids, who have been on the planet for more than 1 million years, how did hominids communicate with each other, 750 or 1 million years before language developed? They did it with
Non-verbally. Yeah.
non-verbally, emotions. And so if you wanted to survive in a small clan, you had to know what the other person was feeling. And they couldn't communicate it to you, not verbally, but they did communicate it to you through facial expressions, grunts, body language, nonverbal communication. And so our brains are, those of us that were able to develop those skills, it got passed on through the genes over millions of years, and we still have the ability to read other people's emotions effortlessly and accurately. We just have to let ourselves do it. We have to give ourselves permission to do it. And it helps when you build the emotional database that we talked about earlier. When you build that database, it makes that process of reading emotions really simple and really easy and really fast. And it's like I said, doing this is like learning how to ride a bike. Once you learn how to ride the bike, you'll never forget. And once you learn how to read and label emotions, you'll never forget. It will always be there. All you're doing is activating parts of the brain that have never been activated before. So yeah, there's really hard science behind all of this stuff. That's why I love it so much, because there's so much psychology that's so bad, so wrong. And this stuff is not science. This stuff is based on neuroscience and evolutionary biology. The hard science for why this works, explanatory science that psychology could never hope to compete with.
The science piece is certainly very interesting. Taking the science that is known or been discovered, no matter how long ago, and working on applying it in the conversations that we have today is always a conversation worth exploring. And I got a bunch more questions I'd love to ask, but I want to be respectful of your day, and we're already up against an hour. So for the people that have listened to this conversation and they're interested in learning more about what you teach, how you teach it, how they can apply it, where should they reach out to connect with you? How should they learn more?
So I'm a solo guy. I don't have an entourage. You can email me. I answer all my own emails. My email is Doug, D-O-U-G, at Doug Noll, DOUGNOLL.com. And email me with your questions, and I'm happy to correspond with you. I have a huge number of resources on my website, which obviously is Doug Noll, DOUGNOLL.com. I've written over 400 blog articles. I've got courses. You can access all my books. All that stuff is online. And if you want to do a Zoom call with me, make a note of this. I'm happy to have a quick Zoom call with you. It's Doug Noll, DOUGNOLL.co.com / capital L Let's capital T Talk. DougNoll.co / capital L capital T Let's Talk. And that'll take you to my calendar scheduler for a Zoom conversation. And I'm always open to talking about this stuff with anybody that wants to chat. So
that's awesome. I'll put all those links in there so people don't have to go hunting for them. We'll make it easy.
All right, Michael.
Well, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing everything. I enjoyed the conversation. I look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you, Michael. Take care.
Take care. Doug, thank you very much for joining us today, sharing your research, sharing your approaches, the stories, your ideas. We really appreciate it. Thank you so very much. And you said a lot in there that's really worth considering and can make a big difference for all of us. I really love how you said we need to have emotional tools to solve emotional problems. That is a great point. The importance of recognizing our own triggers, which in many ways is the first pillar of emotional intelligence that you discussed, is so very important to understand how we react and interact in so many of these conversations. I really liked your point that emotions are data. And the more data points we can collect, the better we can respond and more strategically we can move forward. And I love how you illustrated the importance of developing our emotional competencies. I really appreciated all you shared today, Doug. Thank you so much. And of course, thank you to all of you that were here for another week. We really appreciate you being here week after week and sharing your time with us. Thank you very much. While you're here, please just take a second, like the show, subscribe to the show, share it, let other folks know about it. Leave us your feedback. We'd love to know what you want to hear more or less of. Thank you so much. And of course, while you're online, take a second, check out our sponsors. Head over to humantel.com. Check out their online training and choose which program you feel will get you on your way the fastest to being able to recognize what people are likely thinking and feeling at any moment in time by recognizing shifts in their facial expressions and nonverbal communication. While you're there, enter the code INCLUSIVE25 for 25% off the training of your choice. For the professional interviewers in the audience, please head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. Learn all there is to learn about the International Association of Interviewers. What can you learn? How can you participate? What can you give to the association? Also, while you're there, check out the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. Again, get all your questions answered. What does it take to qualify? How do you earn the designation? And what can it mean for your career moving forward? And while you're online, please check out inquasive.com. That's where you can learn more about the programs our clients ask us to facilitate to their senior leaders, sales teams, HR teams, and beyond to teach them the strategic observation and persuasive communication techniques necessary to uncover the hidden everyday confessions lurking in all of their high-value conversations. We appreciate you being here week after week. Thank you so very much. Please stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time.